Good afternoon, everyone. Happy weekend to you. Josh's severe weather and the tropics now have an area of concern that we need to watch here in the Gulf of Mexico that I believe has a pretty decent chance of becoming a strong tropical storm and maybe even a hurricane. This is now Invest 91L. It is evolving over the Bay of Campeche, moving off of the Mexican coastline into a very favorable area for development. It's going to take some time, but as we head into next week, we definitely have something that we need to be watching in places like the Texas coastline, Louisiana, as well as the rest of the central United States. This is actually going to be a very similar setup as Hurricane Nicholas in 2021. That one didn't look like it was going to be much, but it did spin up very quickly as it moved into the upper Texas coast. This one probably going to go a little bit farther to the right, according to what our models are showing now. But of course, it's still early in the game here. We have a few days, but we don't have a lot of time before this could potentially form. This is a look at what Nicholas did. Came pretty close to the Texas coast, then kind of just rode up the coast as a Category 1 hurricane. Didn't make it to hurricane status until just a few hours before it made its landfall, but brought a lot of rain. And that's what I'm most concerned with this system as well, is that threat for heavy rainfall. And here you can see the rain that did fall with Nicholas, 10 to 15 inches. I think potentially it's going to be farther east, depending on where the track ends up landing here, but definitely is something that we need to be watching. Across the rest of the tropics, obviously the Western Pacific's been very active. The Eastern Pacific is pretty quiet for the time being, and the Atlantic is not super busy outside of this invest that has a 60% chance of becoming a tropical depression or storm over the next several days. And I think it would probably be on Monday when we see that happen. Here's the orange area now. Chances have grown up to 60%. Environmental conditions are forecast to be conducive for this to develop into a depression. In my opinion, probably beyond that to a tropical storm. We have another area to keep an eye on that does not look to be any kind of threat to land, but I will talk about that towards a latter part of this video. If you take a look at the Atlantic Basin and especially the Gulf of Mexico, obviously the reds and the oranges stick out here. And some of the warmest water with respect to average is across the Bay of Campeche here. So we've definitely got storm fuel in place. What the challenge is going to be is, where does the center form? Is it going to be near the coastline being affected by land, or is it going to distance itself enough to potentially become a tropical system here? And this is the area where it could certainly do that, right in the middle of this very warm water as wind shear begins to drop off some. We're going to take a broad look here, and then we'll narrow in on our invest here. And you can see we've got a boundary here, strong low pressure over the eastern Great Lakes. Front is draped across the eastern United States and all the way down into and south of Texas. So it's actually dried out here in the Houston area and certainly feels a little bit more comfortable today. And even Louisiana is getting a bit of a reprieve. All of this is getting shoved southward. The challenge, though, is that we've got an area of high pressure that's building in here and going to build back to the west some. And it's just going to be a tug of war between this area of high pressure over here and the front here. What's going to happen is this trough is going to swing away, and the ridge out west that is producing extreme heat is going to build back in, and we're going to be left with an area of weaker steering currents. And as a result, this front isn't going to get too much farther. It is, after all, early September, and to even see a cold front this far south is kind of a rare treat. We are going to see it eventually get retreated back to the north, so that humidity does start to build back up across the western Gulf of Mexico region, although we're getting that break today. Elsewhere, we've got a non-tropical low that is now moving into Nova Scotia. That is weakening, but bringing some storm force winds with it on the eastern side. Non-tropical low east of that here over the north central Atlantic. And several areas of disturbed weather, but nothing expected to form. One such feature is right here, another one down in here, and that's the area that's got the yellow with it. And we've got another wave that is coming off the African coastline that obviously we need to keep an eye on, but right now does not show signs of development. Here's a look at the Caribbean, and you can see the Caribbean is actually very hostile for any kind of development. We have some rain in the southwest, but a lot of fast flow aloft coming around our area of high pressure here. You can see that fast northeasterly flow, and then our feature here that is moving by to the north of the Virgin Islands, kicking up some rain showers and locally heavy rain over parts of Puerto Rico this afternoon, as well as portions of the northern Windward Islands, seeing a little bit of gusty wind and some heavy rain, but nothing of organization or area to watch is out here over the Bay of Campeche. Here's a look at what's going on in the Gulf. You can see our front is kind of stalled right in here. It's pushed just south of Louisiana. There's actually still a little bit of a low pressure feature that is still here. The front's kind of like this, where we've got this push of stable, cooler air, and you can see that from the stratus here off the Texas coast and over deep South Texas. But we've got a lot of convergence here, still a lot of very heavy rain across this portion of the Gulf here. And southern Louisiana, especially if you're in Terrebonne, Lafourche, Plaquemine, southern Jefferson Parish, still dealing with some heavy rainfall, although it is starting to let up some. And that drier air is starting to make a bit of a push, but it's running into resistance. And unfortunately, we don't see it getting too much farther south if you're in this portion of the Gulf. It's great if you're in Texas. It's a beautiful day for college football, but not so nice farther to the east. Now, what's going on is we've got our second area that we're watching here now emerging. It moved in to this region here and now emerging into the Bay of Campeche. That is now Invest 91L. It is expected to stay kind of close to land, but have enough distance to where these thunderstorms that are beginning to flare up are going to have an environment to grow some, and we do have some more favorable air aloft for that to happen. And so this may be a sneaky system that finds a way to form across this portion of the Southwest Gulf, and this feature here is going to eventually just kind of fade and get sheared apart. So the southern area is where we need to watch where this low may form, and eventually it's going to head up somewhere in this direction in here, and there's obviously going to be some uncertainty until the system does in fact form over the next couple of days. Here's a look at the infrared, and you can see our area of thunderstorms beginning to start to grow here. It is finally in a favorable position to grow. This is a lot healthier than a couple of days ago. And as it distances itself here from the south coast of South Gulf Coast here, Bay of Campeche coast, it is going to be in a very favorable spot. Wind shear in here is not extremely low, but it is starting to reduce itself. And as a result, this area of storms is expected to grow. I'm sorry for my red pen. I was doing pink, but everyone asked for red, and now, of course, we have red thunderstorms. So here is an initial look at where ensembles may take this feature, and all of them show some development, albeit slow, in the next 48 hours. So between now and Monday morning, this is going to be a slowly evolving system. As the system gets closer to the northeastern coast of Mexico and or stays out near 95, 96 west, it should begin to develop more in a pretty favorable spot. And unfortunately, if you look at the GFS ensembles, the recent ones, we see not just one, but several showing intensification down into this region and here. Hurricane intensity is about here, low 980s, given the surrounding pressure. So we have several that do show that hurricane intensity here, and impacting southeast Texas and southwestern Louisiana. We have some weaker solutions out in here as a result of this interacting with land. That is also a possibility, but if you're in this area, I don't know if you've got a lot of time before having to make that call. Here's a look at the ensembles from the European and the GPS Canadian, and we see some intensification, but also some that don't develop it. So about a 60% chance this develops at this point. Looking at our latest model intensity guidance, it's going to be slow go for a while, but there are several solutions once we get to about next Monday night and Tuesday that show this becoming a tropical storm, and we're very close on the high end to this becoming a hurricane. And one thing that I've learned is that forecast models often underdo intensity of developing systems in the shorter term, especially in the Gulf of Mexico. So very possible we get up to this level, even if the forecast isn't showing that now. It's also possible we don't get to that level. And this is the joy of meteorology forecasting. We have to go with our gut, but we also have to go with the data that's in front of us. And sometimes the forecast guidance that's handed to us is just not good enough to do a great job. So here's a look at what the tropical model that has just been run is showing, and it is still in the formative stages, so it's struggling to find our low pressure center here, but you can see pressures in the 980s already indicating that this would be a tropical storm by tomorrow night. Now, I think that's probably too fast and too aggressive. However, you can see the winds are picking up on the western side of this, not so much on the eastern side. So it's going to be lacking some structure as we get past tomorrow night and move into Monday morning. However, we definitely are seeing lowering pressure here, and this model is trying to guess at where the actual low is. And you can see it's kind of bouncing around, but it is not quite picking up on where exactly it's going to form. This particular run has it near the coastline. But there's what you don't see here is that there's also a feature in this area where another low is forming. And so we've got two potential areas that need to consolidate for this to actually get going. Now, the HAFS does not agree with the GFS and the ICON, which are trending to this low developing. And climatology would say that is actually going to be more likely to happen based on what we're seeing. Here's the ICON model, and not the strongest model in the world, but it is the one that kind of held on to this idea first and has not given up on it. And I do like that consistency, but You can see it deepening here over the Western Gulf. This is Tuesday afternoon. We have a moderate tropical storm, then a strong tropical storm Tuesday night. Winds picking up on the Louisiana coast and landfall Wednesday morning. Somewhere near the Atchafalaya Bay or Terrebonne Bay here around late morning on Wednesday as a tropical storm. It continues and fortunately is moving at this point into Mississippi and Alabama, but could produce some gusty winds along the coastline into Thursday morning. That's the ICON model. The GFS model didn't even know this thing existed, and we've seen it trend not only towards the ICON, but into a stronger solution and a stronger scenario that we definitely need to be watching. Now, this model is it does have a higher resolution, so it doesn't quite resolve things as well as some of these hurricane models, but you can see it has a strengthening tropical storm here Tuesday night just off the coast of northeastern Mexico. This is exactly where Nicholas was forming. Those of you that remember back in 2021. Now it is curving away from the coast and developing into a strong tropical storm. And the GFS, in my opinion, might be too aggressive, but what if it's not? That's kind of the point I want to make here. What if it's actually onto something and the other models are just playing catch up? We don't say that too often, but obviously something to watch here. Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday night, we have what would be a Category 1 hurricane, maybe even a strong Category 1 hurricane. This intensity level actually getting close to where Beryl was when it made landfall. So again, it's a worst case scenario model. It may not play out this way, but you can see it does eventually make landfall in southwestern Louisiana very early on Thursday and take some time to spin down here. This could be a big rainmaker for Louisiana and Mississippi heading into Wednesday night, Thursday, and Thursday night. So GFS showing hurricane potential, ICON showing stronger tropical storm potential. We're going to obviously have to wait and see on it because it hasn't formed yet, but we've got about 3 to 4 days to prepare at this point, which isn't a lot of time. And unfortunately, if you live on the Gulf Coast, you don't ever really get a lot of time unless we watch a storm that's come off of Africa and is very clearly going into the Gulf. And that hasn't happened since Hurricane Laura, to be honest with you guys, Hurricane Ida as well. Ian even popped up very quickly here, and so did Idalia. So things don't always give you much notice. And that's the point I want to make here is we need to kind of prepare for the worst and kind of hope for the best at this point. Here's a look at wind shear in the Gulf, and you can see it's actually pretty favorable here in the Southwest Gulf. Low amounts of wind shear. Stronger wind shear is up over the southern states here, but we've got some favorable low wind shear in place in the Southwest Gulf. And that's part of the reason I do think this has a decent chance of developing a little bit quicker than what a lot of our models are showing. The one thing that would hamper this would be interaction with Mexico. But you can see here, the wind shear remains very high in the southern U.S., but remains very low across the middle and western Gulf of Mexico. And it stays that way until this feature gets close to the coast here, Wednesday night, Thursday morning. Eventually, wind shear picks up. At that point, though, it's already going to be making some landfall and probably would stop strengthening, I would think. So obviously, that's something we need to be watching. Taking a look at relative humidity, dry air is often something that gets in the way of formation. You can see that dry air is definitely there across this portion of the Western Gulf, but you can see there's a ton of moisture over the Western Gulf. This is a favorable spot if I've ever seen one for anything to form in this region in here. And it's got its own environment that it could reshape if it strengthens. You can see the moisture just gets pulled up and dry air doesn't really become an issue until it makes landfall Thursday morning. Then we've got the dry tongue. And if this is correct, and if it is strong, we may have some severe weather to deal with, tornadoes in this area as well. So something to keep an eye on in the future here. Let's move on to wind speeds. And again, this is worst case scenario first. Gusty winds over the Western Gulf behind our front. Then we see winds picking up here south and west of the center of the storm, perhaps up to 60 miles per hour just off the Mexican coastline, 40 around Tampico. You can see, obviously, the GFS develops it a lot more quickly, so we see winds to hurricane force in the northwestern Gulf Wednesday evening, and maybe gusting as high as 89 to 90 miles per hour here well offshore. The oil platforms in here could have wind gusts to hurricane force, so you may want to go ahead and stock up on your gas now in case these have to get evacuated. That's worst case scenario, not necessarily the official forecast, just something to be prepared for. But if it is a stronger system, we may see hurricane force winds getting close to the coast of Texas and Louisiana, and tropical storm force winds extending well inland into portions of the Ark-La-Mis region if this track is correct. This could shift east towards New Orleans, west towards Lake Charles. Right now, the strongest winds showing up around Acadiana in that region here Wednesday night and Thursday morning. Here's a closer look at that as well, just to show you guys the stronger winds start to arrive here around midnight Wednesday night at the coastline and then inland Thursday morning, again, according to the GFS model. But we've seen this on the last few runs of the GFS now. It's not like it's showing it now and it's not going to show it next run. This has now been a few runs in a row of this. Icon showing some very heavy rainfall along the coastal waters here over the next couple of days, but just confined right now to far southern Louisiana and into parts of northern Florida. We see the heaviest rain staying offshore, fortunately, because some of these models are spitting out over a foot of rain between now and when the storm may arrive, and then those amounts climb significantly to maybe as much as a foot of rain. Places like Calcasieu Parish, Vermilion Parish, Louisiana, up to Acadia Parish and Jefferson Davis Parish. So obviously, some spots here do have some pretty significant rain potential, maybe even all the way up into eastern Mississippi and northwest Alabama. If you look at the blend of the models, now that's not just the Icon, but several other models, you can see that that idea is also there. Between now and next weekend, amounts near the coast as much as 9 to 10 inches. Of the Texas coast, higher amounts near Louisiana, Mississippi, and locally over a foot of rain, maybe as much as 16 to even 18 inches of rain, which would put us off the charts. That is for the south central United States, giving you guys a quick, closer look here. Let me see if I can zoom in to the local. We'll look real quick at southeast Texas. And again, just a blend of everything shows about 4 inches in Houston, but it drops off significantly to your west, climbs significantly to your east. Looking at Louisiana, some pretty significant totals here south of I-10 and I-12. Maybe over 7 more inches of rain in New Orleans, 8 in Houma. If you're down in like Port Fourchon, Grand Isle, those areas, you could see another foot of rain on top of what you've already received this week, which is not a good scenario, unfortunately. Coastal Mississippi, maybe as much as a foot close to Pascagoula. Same goes for portions of the Mobile area towards the coast, maybe as much as a foot. And looking farther to the east here across Florida, you too are going to see some significant rain, maybe as much as 11 inches around the coastal area of Pensacola, Gulf Breeze, for example, maybe 8 inches in Fort Walton Beach, 7 in Panama City, and close to 10 in Port St. Joe. The peninsula is going to stay pretty unsettled, but mainly we're looking at afternoon thunderstorms. Some of those could produce a few inches, though, as we all know here in Florida. So that's a look at this system. We're going to have more coming in the coming days. I don't think I'll be able to get a video done tomorrow. I don't know if a lot will change between now and then. I think Monday is kind of our key day when we finally get a feel for what's going to happen. And by Tuesday and Wednesday, assuming it's coming this way, we need to be preparing. All right, well, we've got a boundary moving offshore here. Area of low pressure beginning to form here east of South Carolina, something to keep an eye on, but it is heading out to sea. We also have low pressure here moving into Nova Scotia here this afternoon. Heavy rain has already advanced well north of that. We should see improvement by this evening. And here's our area to watch. This is Bermuda here, and here's the area to watch south of Bermuda. Right now it's very ragged, very disheveled, just something that may bring some heavier showers in your direction in Bermuda. In the central Atlantic, things are okay for the time being, but this area here is starting to try to flare up, but going through cycles and not enough persistent convection yet to even call it a disturbance. That may be an area to invest, but as it moves in this direction, we need to keep an eye on things. Right now, though, nothing too urgent at this point. And across the eastern Atlantic, all looks pretty good, but take a look at this ginormous wave here that will probably be moving offshore in a couple of days. That we do need to track later next week and into next weekend. The reason things have not gone as planned here in the last several weeks is that we have had an unfavorable MJO. This is the Madden-Julian oscillation, and favorable positions for it here for those of us in the Atlantic to learn to talk would be to see things in this direction. But we've been down in here on the opposite side of the globe. That's why we had that super typhoon in the Western Pacific and a lot of storms earlier in the Central Pacific. Now, as we move on here, we are now kind of heading into this null phase. It is a 5 and 6, but it's null. And when we head towards null, conditions aren't necessarily going to be great everywhere, but there'll be localized areas where there's lower wind shear. But overall, not a large-scale sinking pattern or a large-scale rising pattern for storms to form. The rising, obviously, is what we need to see. But right now, it's in null. It'll eventually move back to the Western Pacific and should come full circle at the end of the month. For us to see a lot more action here. So we may go a couple more weeks without anything major, but then I think towards the end of September, we do need to be watching more closely. Here's a look at the rising air in green, the sinking air across the main development region here in brown. That is not favorable. We may get a window here next week where it does become more favorable for a few days. Then we head back towards marginal conditions. And yeah, something could sneak through here, but longer term, it's not looking great to see something in the Gulf or the Caribbean next weekend or into the following week. but then we trend back in a direction where it may become more favorable after the 20th of September. And we continue to watch with bated breath at this point. So real quick, the GFS model in the longer term, showing some gradual development here, maybe a weaker system, maybe a depression or even tropical storm forming from the wave in the central Atlantic. This is next Thursday. You can see the wave behind it probably has more promise. The GFS has been back and forth on this. It had it moving into the Caribbean towards the southeast a couple days ago. Now it has it forming and developing and becoming a fish storm, which is what we're rooting for here for the week of the 16th. And you can see on the Canadian, doesn't go out quite that far, but here's our weaker system. It'll actually potentially die by the end of next week. Here's the one behind it, never really gets going like the GFS says. We'll have to see if that ends up being right or if the GFS is on to something or they're both wrong, which is certainly a possibility. And here's the European, and again, it's struggling to form this system here in the central Atlantic. This is middle of next week, and it stays very weak and eventually fades. And the European is not in a hurry to develop the feature behind it, which may end up being correct. Finally, those of you who have asked about Typhoon Yagi, it is weakening now. A remnant tropical storm moving well through Vietnam. Just a very destructive system here, unfortunately. What happened was it was a Category 5, weakened to a 4, and just clipped the northern island of Hainan, went right over Haiku as a very strong typhoon. What had happened was it was expected to weaken due to this land interaction, and it did for a little bit, but then it re-strengthened right up until landfall here as a 126 mile per hour Category 3 system near Haiphong and Halong here. Just the eye wall went over this area here yesterday, and unfortunately, the news is not looking great. We don't have a lot of full data coming from this area, but a very nasty storm and probably one of the strongest to ever hit Vietnam, at least that I can recall. Maybe there have been some, but I just can't recall them. And fortunately, it's going to weaken, but it will still produce heavy rain over northwest Vietnam, Laos, and neighboring areas as well. Here's what it looked like when it made landfall here in Vietnam. 126 mile per hour typhoon, just something you just don't see every day, and we really hope to never see again. Just a really bad setup for those folks. So if you are a praying person, obviously they could use your prayers. So I thank you guys for your time today. I'll be back on Monday. Thank you so much. Please consider becoming a subscriber and a member of this community. As always, I thank you guys for your time. I wish you all the best. I want you to be prepared for what's to come. And I want to honor God and give him all the glory. He gives me the opportunity to share every day the good news with everyone. And John 14:6, Jesus answered that I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And because I am a Christian and a believer in God, I truly believe this word, this holy word, based on what I've studied over the last several years. Before I became a believer, I really struggled with my faith. I struggled with the future, but knowing now that that sacrifice was made for me and billions of other believers, that I am very much willing to go out on a limb and go out in faith and say that this is the truth that I truly believe. And I pray that it is for you as well. If it's not, I'm not going to judge you personally because I've been there. I was there for 30 years of my life. But now that I've seen this hope and this light through Jesus, I just want to share with everyone how great that hope can be for those of you who choose to make that decision. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll catch up with you again soon. God bless you.